Now let's talk about neurons. We need to start talking about the structural and functional units. If I can remind you, so when we study about the kidneys, we were talking about nephrons. So nephrons are the functional units. So these are the workhorse for the kidney. A kidney doesn't mean anything if there is no nephron. The same thing like for our nervous system, the neurons are the functional units. These are the workhorse. Without the neurons, our nervous system will not function. And the same thing like the structural unit. This is, I believe you remember this. Of course, this is sarcomere. Sarcomere is the structural unit of the skeletal muscle, and this is osteon. Yeah, osteon is the structural unit of the compact bone. So let's say if I give you a piece of brain and ask you, what is it made of? Of course, it is made of neurons, because the neurons will function for this brain, and supporting cells for the neuron, which we call neuroglial cells. So a piece of nervous tissue will be made of neuron and neuroglial cells. Neurons are the functional units. They are excitable cells. They will transmit electrical signals as electrical impulses. Neuroglial cells, they will surround the neuron, they will protect the neuron, they will support the neuron, and they will nourish the neurons. Both neurons or neuroglial cells, they originate from the neural tube and neural crest cells. That is the embryonic origin. So neuron is the functional unit of the nervous system. The components of the neurons is, number one, the cell body with all tree-like branches. These are called dendrites. Dendrites in Greek, it is the tree branches. They look like that. And from the neuron, a long tubular structure comes out. This is called axon. So a neuron is made of a cell body and the dendrites with the axon. Axon will end in the essay, like a terminal branching, which we call terminal arborization. So the function of the neuron is to transmit electrical signals and carry along the axon. Function of the neuroglial cells, of course, they are not neuronal cells, and therefore they will not transmit any electrical signals, but they will support the neuron, they will protect the neuron, they will form myelin, which covers the axon, and they will maintain the homeostasis. So if you find, like if you type on internet, a neuron, and if you go search for image, you are going to see this type of diagrams. So this is a typical diagram of a neuron, which include the cell body with the dendrites and gradually narrow as a funnel shape, which is what we call axon halo, and start to become axon. Axon can be short, axon can be long, and these axons are covered with the blue structure, which we call myelin sheath. Myelin sheaths are made from Schwann cell. And at the end, axon will terminate as terminal arborization. And these little tips are called terminal protons. If you look at the cell body of the neurons, you will see the large central nucleus, which is surrounded by the cells around here, which is ref endoplasmic reticulum. And this is important when a neuron dies, the nucleus will become small and they will be coming to a little corner. And dendrites, they act as a receptive region. Their job is to sense the changes in the environment and bring those signals to the cell body here. And from the cell body, and when it gets to the axon hillock, axon hillock will determine if the neuron will send an action potential or not. And then that action potential will be traveled along the axon, and when it gets to the terminal arborization, they will transmit the chemicals from the terminal buttons. Let's talk about the important characteristics of the neurons. Neurons are extremely long-lived. They will live as long as we do, I hope. So they are the rest of our life. If a neuron is damaged, that part which supply the body might not function. And neurons, they do not divide. So depending on which research paper you are reading, some neuroscientists will say, hey, once we are born with these neurons down to the adult life, and these neurons will just develop, but they will not duplicate. But there is a process called neurogenesis. Some neuroscientists will argue that there is enough evidence that new neurons are formed, which is a process called neurogenesis. We're going to stop here. But anyway, the neurons will not divide to become like a brain tumor, you know. The neurons have high metabolic rate. They need lots and lots of oxygen. And therefore, if we see somebody who is in shock, we give lots of oxygen. It is a reason to support the neuronal cells. Neurons will carry electrical signals as action potential or nerve impulse. As we know, most of the neurons are in the central nervous system. If they are in the peripheral nervous system, they will stay in a group, and that group of neurons is called ganglia. So I hope you can appreciate the cell body of a neuron, the dendrites of the neuron, the central nucleus of the neuron, intracellular structures, axon hillock, and axon hillock became the axon. Yeah, axon will conduct, carries the electrical signal generated by the cell body. And if we continue to follow the axon hillock, we have the axon. So let's talk about axon, a few characteristics of axon. Axons, like either short or long axon, their diameter is uniform. So their diameter remain unchanged along its length. They will carry the electrical impulse from the cell body down to the terminal arborization. They contain chromatophilic substances like neurofilaments, but they do not contain any ribosome, and therefore they can produce protein. Axon can be short, axon can be long. If we are talking about a long axon, we will be talking about a nerve fiber. So a nerve fiber is nothing more than a collection of long axons. Axon diameter can be small, can be large. The speed of the conduction in an axon is directly proportionate to the diameter of the axon. So the larger the diameter, the better the conduction. And of course, all the axon we end as terminal arborization. These are the branchings. The tips of the terminal arborization is called terminal boutons. So our terminal boutons can end in two ways. One, it can end on an end organ, for example, like muscle, or it can end on another axon's dendrite. So let's say if the terminal boutons end on the dendrite of another axon, then we will say exodendritic synapse. If the terminal bouton ends on the organ, such as muscle, we will say exonsomatic synapse. So now I'm introducing a new terminology, which is synapse. Synapse is the physical junction. It is really a physical junction between the terminal arborization, terminal bouton, and the target organ. And you can see the physical space here. This space is called synaptic cleft. And inside the terminal boutons, we have the synaptic vesicles, where we store the neurotransmitters. So once there is an electrical impulse coming to the terminal boutons, these synaptic vesicles will get close and they will discharge the neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. And these neurotransmitters will act on the receptors of the target organ. Of course, this target organ could be a muscle, for example, then that's what we call exosomatic synapse. And if the terminal bouton ends on a dendrite of another neuron, then we will be talking about exodendritic synapse. I hope you understand that. I want you to go back again and study before we move on to another topic.